Search the term aliens and you get grainy footage, government leaks, blurry lights over Nevada. Roswell, New Mexico, 1947. A crashed weather balloon convinced an entire country a saucer had landed nearby. Turn the question around for a second. What if the aliens already landed, built cities, split the atom, and now argue about who owns the moon? What if that species is us? Life started on this planet roughly 3.8 billion years ago, in shallow water, as single cells with no brain and no plan. Fish swam these oceans 400 million years before a mammal ever took a breath. Reptiles crawled onto land 375 million years ago, dragging their bodies through mud with fins that slowly turned into legs. Every animal alive today carries millions of years of trial and failure inside its bones. A kangaroo lives on one continent. An ostrich runs across African plains and nowhere else. A gecko in Madagascar stays in Madagascar for its entire species history. Nature builds animals for a single patch of the planet, then leaves them there for millions of years. European rabbits reached Australia in 1859, 24 animals released near Geelong for hunting. Within 50 years, their descendants numbered in the hundreds of millions and stripped vegetation across the entire continent. Cane toads arrived in 1935 to control beetles, then poisoned every predator that tried to eat them. A single species dropped into a new environment can rewrite an ecosystem within decades. Humans did the same thing to the entire planet, only slower and with tools. Change usually takes forever. A fish needed close to 50 million years to grow legs and crawl onto shore, based on fossil records from Tiktaalik in Canada, dated around 375 million years ago. A horse spent 55 million years shrinking from a dog-sized forest browser into the animal grazing in a field today. Biology moves at the speed of geology, one mutation, one generation, one slow accident at a time. Stone tools at Lomekwi, Kenya, date back 3.3 million years, older than the genus Homo itself. Evidence of controlled fire at Wonderwork Cave, South Africa, points to roughly 1 million years of hominins cooking food and warming caves. Fire let a primate digest more calories in less time than any competing species on the savanna. Human DNA overlaps with chimpanzee DNA by about 98.8%, according to genome comparisons published in 2005. The remaining fraction, well under 2%, accounts for walking upright, a voice box capable of complex speech, and a prefrontal cortex that plans decades ahead instead of minutes. Brain size across primates grew slowly for millions of years. Then, within the last 300,000 years, Homo sapiens brains reached roughly 1,350 cubic centimeters, 3 times the size of a chimpanzee brain, packed into a skull that took a fraction of the usual mammalian timeline to reshape. Fossils found in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, in 2017 pushed the age of Homo sapiens back to roughly 300,000 years. That sounds ancient until you compare it to sharks, which have patrolled oceans for 400 million years. Our species is a rounding error next to almost everything else alive. Genetic studies suggest the human population may have dropped to as few as 10,000 breeding individuals around 74,000 years ago, possibly linked to the eruption of Mount Toba in Sumatra. A species that nearly vanished in a single volcanic winter went on, within 3,000 generations, to build rockets. Around 70,000 years ago, small groups walked out of East Africa. Within 60,000 years, their descendants reached Australia, Siberia, and the tip of South America. No other primate has ever managed that. Chimpanzees stayed in the forests of Central Africa. Gorillas never left. Humans crossed deserts, oceans, and ice sheets, arriving on every continent except Antarctica before writing was even invented. Polynesian navigators reached Hawaii by roughly 1000 AD, and Rapa Nui, thousands of kilometers from any other landmass, somewhere around 1200 AD, using stars and ocean swells instead of instruments. No other mammal on Earth has ever crossed open ocean voluntarily to colonize an island it could not see. Humans never lived in Antarctica until the 20th century. Today, more than 70 permanent and seasonal research stations dot the continent, run by over 30 countries under a treaty signed in 1959. The last unclaimed corner of the planet turned into shared real estate within decades of the first expedition reaching the South Pole in 1911. About 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, people started planting wheat instead of gathering it. Dogs had already been living alongside hunters for thousands of years by then. Cattle were domesticated near the Tigris River around 10,500 years ago. Horses were tamed on the steppes of Kazakhstan near 3,500 BC by the Botai culture. Each domesticated species became a tool bent to human use within a few thousand years, a blink compared to the million-year timelines nature usually runs on. Cats appear to have domesticated themselves near Cyprus around 9,500 years ago, drawn in by rodents living off stored grain. Chickens were bred from red jungle fowl in Southeast Asia roughly 8,000 years ago. Within 10,000 years, 4 wild species turned into livestock, feeding a planet of 8 billion mouths. Cuneiform writing appeared in Sumer around 3,400 BC. The printing press reached Europe in 1440 through Johannes Gutenberg's workshop in Mainz. The internet went public in the 1990s. 3 inventions, each cutting the time needed to spread an idea by orders of magnitude, all crammed into the final sliver of our species' existence. 10,000 years ago, the entire human population stood at around 4 million people scattered across the globe. By 1800, that number reached 1 billion. Today, it sits above 8 billion. Cities rose where forests once stood. Concrete replaced soil across millions of square kilometers in under 2 centuries. Atmospheric carbon dioxide sat around 280 parts per million for most of the last 800,000 years, based on ice core records from Antarctica. Since the Industrial Revolution began in Britain around 1760, that number has climbed past 420 parts per million. A single species changed the chemistry of the entire atmosphere in roughly 260 years, a time frame too short to register in most geological measurements. Biologists tracking extinction rates estimate that species now disappear 100 to 1,000 times faster than the natural background rate calculated from fossil records. The dodo vanished from Mauritius by 1681, less than a century after sailors first landed there. The passenger pigeon numbered in the billions across North America, then dropped to 0 by 1914. No asteroid caused either loss. Plastic production reached 400 million tons a year by 2022, according to OECD figures. Microplastic particles now turn up in Arctic snow and in human blood samples. No species before us has left a synthetic residue lodged inside its own bloodstream. Over 1.4 million kilometers of undersea fiber optic cable now wrap around the planet, carrying more than 95% of international data traffic, according to telecom industry reports. Satellites in low Earth orbit numbered around 3,000 in 2015. By 2024, that number passed 9,000, most of them launched within the last 5 years by a single company, SpaceX. Every other creature on this planet adapts through its body, a longer leg, a sharper claw, a thicker shell. Humans adapt through objects sitting outside the body, a spear, a plow, a satellite. Cognitive tools replaced physical evolution within roughly 50,000 years, a fraction of a single % of the time reptiles needed to grow legs. Something changed the rules of the game. Sputnik reached orbit in 1957. 12 years later, in July 1969, 2 humans stood on the surface of the moon. 52 years after that, in 2021, a rover started drilling into Martian bedrock. Each leap took a fraction of the time the previous leap needed. In 2021, the Perseverance rover landed in Jezero crater on Mars, hunting for signs of ancient microbial life. NASA's Artemis program now plans permanent lunar bases within this decade. The species that walked out of Africa 70,000 years ago is preparing to walk off the entire planet. History appears to be repeating the same expansion, aimed at a new rock in space. Physicist Enrico Fermi asked in 1950 why, given the size and age of the universe, no alien signal had ever reached us. 75 years of scanning the sky with radio telescopes at places like Green Bank, West Virginia, has turned up nothing. Maybe the search points the wrong direction. Maybe the signal already arrived, walked out of a cave in Africa, and started building antennas of its own. Neanderthals shared Europe with Homo sapiens for thousands of years before disappearing around 40,000 years ago. DNA sequencing published in 2010 by a team led by Svante Pääbo showed that most people outside Africa carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA today. One branch of humanity vanished, the other kept expanding, carrying a piece of the vanished branch along for the ride. Thomas Edison patented a practical light bulb in 1879. Within a single century, electric light reached most of the planet's landmass. Satellite images of Earth at night now show coastlines, highways, and entire countries outlined in artificial light, a signature visible from orbit that no other species has ever produced. More than 40,000 tracked pieces of debris now orbit the planet, according to tracking data from the U.S. Space Command, leftover fragments from over 60 years of rockets and satellites. The species spread junk into orbit before finishing the job of exploring its own neighborhood. Every textbook draws a straight line from bacteria to fish to reptile to mammal to human, as if we belong here the same way a kangaroo belongs in Australia. The math tells a stranger story. Our species arrived late, spread fast, rewired the planet's chemistry, wiped out other species at a rate matching a mass extinction, and now plans to leave for another world entirely. A visiting geologist studying this planet from scratch with no attachment to the label human might file humans under the same category as an invasive species dropped in from somewhere else. Maybe the search for aliens keeps failing for a simple reason. Nobody checks the mirror. Somewhere between a fish crawling onto land 375 million years ago and a rover drilling into Martian rock last year, one branch of primates decided to keep moving. Whether that branch counts as native to Earth or as a visitor that overstayed a very long welcome depends on how the question gets asked. Telescopes still point outward, toward Roswell-style stories and radio static from deep space. Maybe the better instrument is a mirror, propped up next to the launch pad,